So lesson 4.3 is on solving one-step inequalities by multiplying and dividing. Now, this will be very similar to solving one-step equations by multiplying and dividing, but there will be one extra rule that we will need to understand when I am multiplying and dividing by a negative, and I will get into that here in a little bit. So we will need to solve the inequality, and then we will also need to graph it as well. So here I have x divided by 5 is less than or equal to negative 3. So the opposite of dividing by 5 is to multiply by 5. So we're still following our rules of solving for the variable. So we need to cross our 5's out because they cross reduce, and if I multiply this side by 5, I need to multiply that side by 5. I'm going to bring down my variable and my inequality. And negative 3 times 5 is negative 15. So we need to read all of these inequalities to ourselves so we understand how we need to graph our inequality. So x, or any number that I plot on here, needs to be less than or equal to negative 15. So I have my graph. We always have 0 in the middle. Negative 15 is on the left. Less than or equal to tells me to have a closed circle. And numbers that are less than or equal to 15 are on the left side. So smaller is on that side. So we solved it and graphed it. Next one, n divided by negative 3 is less than 1. Same type of problem, except for it just has a different symbol showing that it's being divided by negative 3 instead of the fraction. So the opposite of dividing by negative 3 is to times by negative 3. We can cancel out our negative 3's. Times by negative 3. Now I have n, and we know 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. Now here is where our main difference comes in. With inequalities, if you multiply or divide by a negative, that means the number that's with your variable is a negative. You need to flip your inequality. So if it was less than, it needs to become greater than. If it was greater than or equal to, it would need to become less than or equal to. So if I go back up into that last example, so I did have a negative on the other side, that's okay. But because x was being divided by positive 5, I did not flip my inequality. The number that was with the variable was positive, so we do not flip it. In this case, n is being divided by negative 3. So because our variable was being divided by a negative, all right, that means we need to multiply by a negative. And like I said, if you multiply or divide by a negative, we must flip the inequality. So now instead of this less than, we need to have greater than. All right, when we multiply or divide by a negative, when we are solving inequalities, we must flip the inequality to the opposite side. So our answer is actually n is greater than negative 3. So when I'm graphing this, I need to have 0 in the middle, negative 3, greater than tells me just an open circle, and numbers that are more than or greater than negative 3 are on our right side. Okay? All right, negative 3 is greater than 2/3 p. So we need to get p by itself. And when I have a fraction being multiplied by a variable, in order to get rid of that fraction, instead of dividing by a fraction, we multiply by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal is 3/2. Now, I can already determine if I'm going to flip this inequality or not. Because this 2/3 was with my variable and 2/3 was positive, I will not flip my inequality. And I will stress that you keep the variable on that side. You don't want to get in the habit of flipping the variable to the left side, because then you're going to have to think about, changing your inequality as well. So just leave the variable on the side that it is started. In this case, it started on the left, I left it on my left side. My variable started on my right, so I'm just leaving it on my right. And we already determined that because this 2/3 was positive, I do not change that inequality, so we're keeping it looking the same. And if I multiply this side by 3/2, we need to multiply this side by 3/2. Now let's make negative 3 look like a fraction and put negative 3/1. Okay? I cannot cross reduce anything. All right, so I'm actually just going to bring this down one more line. 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. 2 times 1 is 2. All right, that would also be negative 4.5. Okay, I'll accept either of those. So I have negative 9/2 or negative 4.5. That tells me to have a open circle. Now you got to be careful when you read this. You need to read it in terms of with the variable first. So I'm going to kind of read backwards here. All right, so this says P is less than negative 9/2. So all the numbers that we need to graph need to be less than negative 9/2. Less than goes to that side. Okay. All right, last example. Negative 6x is less than or equal to negative 18. Well, negative 6 and x are being multiplied, so we need to divide by negative 6 and divide by negative 6. And since I divided by a negative, we're going to end up flipping this inequality because my negative that was with my variable, or sorry, so that my number that was with my variable was a negative, we are going to end up flipping that inequality. Our 6's cancel out. I'm bringing down my variable. Since I divided by negative, we flip the inequality, and then 18 divided by negative 6 is negative 3. This tells me to have a closed circle, and we graph all the numbers that are greater than or equal to negative 3. Those numbers are on that side of negative 3. So one more time, we are only focused on the number that's with my variable in terms of flipping this inequality. If the number with your variable is negative, you are going to flip your inequality. We do not care if the number on the other side is positive or negative. This could have been a positive 18 or a negative 18. It wouldn't have mattered. It just matters that the number that's with your variable is positive or negative. Okay? So if you multiply or divide by a negative, you have to flip your inequality. If you multiply or divide by a positive, you do not flip your inequality. All right, so your homework is on page 143. You will do 4 through 18 even numbers only, and then you will go to 27 through 35, and on those you just do the odds.